speech yesterday and the sanctions that were put on?
I think that President Biden is doing what he can. Unfortunately, I think it's not enough to change Russia's international behavior, and it wasn't enough for the duration of a number of Republican and Democratic administrations. Go back to 2008 when Russia invaded Georgia, and it's still occupying 20% of Georgia's territory. That was the tail end of the Bush administration. Barack Obama came in. The Europeans were talking to Putin. President Sarkozy of France went to Moscow. No luck. Russia continued to occupy and violate sovereignty. At that time, I published a number of articles and said Ukraine is next. The Crimea, where I was born, is next. And that's exactly what happened. Unfortunately, the Russians started giving out their citizenship, their passports like candy. And then in 2014, using the pretext of the Yanukovych presidency being toppled in Ukraine through the Maidan popular protests, the Russians occupied the Crimea and those two districts in eastern Ukraine called the Donbass, the Donetsk and Luhansk districts. And now Putin is pouring his troops in order to expand that operation and probably, in my estimate, take over eastern Ukraine, possibly including the capital, Kyiv. I listened very carefully what President Putin had to say in his 1 hour long rambling historic discourse, laying the bill of particulars against Ukraine. He does not recognize the Ukrainian people as a separate people. He calls them Russians, Russian Orthodox, etc. And he doesn't recognize Ukrainian independence and territorial integrity and sovereignty. So given that, and given insufficient response by the United States and the West, there's not much we can do. We do not want a war with Russia, the second largest nuclear power in the world, and we will probably let the Russians eat Ukraine up.
So, Dr. Cohen, with that said, what's Vladimir Putin's endgame? What's he looking to achieve here?
What Vladimir Putin said he is doing, he is revising the outcome of the Cold War. He is regaming the Cold War. He didn't like the result of the Soviet Union collapse. He called it the biggest geopolitical catastrophe of the 20th century. Not World War I, not World War II, not the Holocaust, not Hiroshima. The collapse of the Soviet Union. That is the biggest geopolitical catastrophe, according to Vladimir Putin. And he now wants the Ukrainian core and the Russian Federation and Belarus, which is to the west of Russia, the three Eastern Slavic Orthodox countries as that core for Russian Empire, minus maybe some other countries will be in play later on, especially territories with the Russian population. But for now, he is reconstituting the Russian Empire, not all of the Soviet Union with the Caucasus and Central Asia. He will just increase his influence there and exercise a sphere of influence throughout the territory of the former Soviet Union. Now, there are serious economic consequences for that, including, as we saw, high oil prices in Europe, 1,000 cubic meters of natural gas, which is a unit of trade in Europe, is about $1,000. It's very expensive now. The storage in Germany and elsewhere is almost empty, deliberately so because the Russians were squelching their supply. And high oil and gas prices may just topple Western Europe into a recession. And that, of course, may have a contagious effect. There may be a recession contagion emanating from Europe. Also, some strategic minerals, such as titanium, that is used in aerospace, the supply may be cut if the Russians don't like what's going on with our sanctions against their banks, again, their debt. We were playing with the idea of unplugging Russia from SWIFT, from the
Right.
interbank system that allows people to send money and pay between currencies and between bank accounts around the world. And of course, the Russians will not like that.
Right.
But I keep saying Russia is a country that survived communism, man-made famine, 2 world wars. This is not something that is going to change Putin's international behavior. And as a result, a lot of Russians and Ukrainians will be killed. A lot of people will suffer. A lot of lives will be destroyed. This is a crime that is being committed in front of our eyes. It is tragic.
Right, right. It certainly is. I mean, the humanitarian toll is clearly unimaginable. We really haven't seen anything to that extent in quite some time, to your point before. And, you know, with the high inflation environment we're in right now of all underlying commodities, oil and natural gas will certainly impact global central bank policy for sure. It's certainly going to impact the everyday person because it's going to be incredibly expensive to heat homes, to get your car from point A to point B. But I guess the question is, Dr. Cohen, will the sanctions be enough to hurt Russia? Yes, they have a nuclear, they're a major nuclear player. Yes, they have a vast amount of land. They have so many people. But from an economic standpoint, they're really not a power player.
Well, there was, I think, Barack Obama's economic advisor who said Russia is not important outside of oil and gas. I respectfully disagree. Russia is a major player in the nuclear industry. Rosatom, the Russian state-owned nuclear reactor corporation, is the largest builder of civilian nuclear reactors around the world. Russia is a major exporter of weapons. And other raw materials. Look, yes, it is an economy that is smaller than Italy and bigger than Spain. 1.5, $1.7 trillion a year economy. Maybe a bit bigger than Belgium or the Netherlands, nowhere near Germany or UK or France. Nevertheless, punching above its weight with the nuclear weapons, with conventional military, as we can see, now in an alliance with China.
Yes.
So imagine a scenario in which Putin is taking Ukraine and the Chinese are starting something against Taiwan. US will be torn between the Pacific theater and Europe. A big, big challenge for us.
It certainly is. I mean, especially with the strength in numbers, to your point before. So to wrap up here, I know you had written a book, a whole Russia, Ukraine, right? And it predicted many of the things.
Russian imperialism, yeah.
Right.
That's the name of the book.
And predicted many of the things that have happened recently. So what are your predictions with Putin? Will this be America's biggest challenge with Putin and Russia over the next few years? I mean, our geopolitical situation in the U.S. is pretty fragile as it is. I mean, I don't think anyone was necessarily expecting this a year or two ago to the extent that we're dealing with it now. It seems like a huge challenge.
I don't understand why nobody was expecting it. If I visited Moscow before COVID a couple of times a year, every year, and people were talking about the big war. They were scheduling for 2020 because of COVID. It got delayed by a year plus. So this was coming. This was in the cards. All the rhetoric that Russia was putting out was denying existence of Ukrainian people and Ukrainian state. Now, it's a challenge for NATO because we saw our NATO allies do not step up to the plate. They're not paying. They're not building their military, especially Germany that has, 100 tanks and maybe 36 airplanes, battle-worthy. It's a joke. So we need to work with our European allies to get them to take more responsibility on European security while we are focusing on the Pacific and on China.
Thank you for watching. Please subscribe to get more content like this.